Okay, so today's video is all about impact, and all we're going to do is we're just going to try and experience and spend a practice session accumulating as much repetition as possible, trying to get this shaft lean embedded in towards the golf swing. And similar to the thumbnail that sort of attracted you to this video, that's what I want you to imagine that you're doing when you get set up. So when you're looking down at your club, you want to try and make sure that you can't see any sort of shadowing underneath the club, meaning I don't need to position the club shaft too vertical. The thing that I really want you to do is introduce as much shaft lean as you can, so you almost feel like the bottom groove is flush towards the floor, and that's exactly what we need to do to get started with. So we're promoting a lot of shaft lean. Now, when you start doing this type of drill and exercise, you can only really progress up the club so far, because if you started trying to practice with something like a 6-iron and you're de-lofting it as much as this, because we're not going to be putting tremendous amounts of club head speed in, you wouldn't get the trajectory. But I certainly think you need to learn to do this type of technique with your sort of wedges first, and then progressing up to sort of like your mid-irons. Now, ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to get out the habit of flicking and scooping, which is something that plagues 95% of golfers, if not slightly more. And what we're trying to do is learn how to get those hands forward and control the low point by moving slightly differently. So again, what I tend to do when I work with students on this is tend to work on a couple of drills and exercises, and that's what I'm running through today. So the first thing I would do is I would encourage the student to change the setup position. Okay, now whether this is something that you end up continuing with slightly, or whether it's just something that you end up experimenting with on a short-term basis, it doesn't matter. Okay, now what you would do is we're basically going to make sure that the butt end of the club is ahead of the actual golf ball itself, as you can see here. So it's making sure that when I'm looking down at the club, I can't see any of the shadowing, and the leading edge is located as low to the floor as possible. Now, from this position, what you're going to do is you're going to take hold of the club with your lead hand as you normally would, although obviously it will feel in a slightly different position. And then you're going to place your trail hand on the club. Now, this should basically be impact, because what happens in the golf swing is our hands on the way down, they work narrower than they did on the way up, if that makes sense. So we don't sort of take the hands on this wide angle and bring them down on the same wide angle. And the reason for this is because in the backswing, my upper arm moves away from my body, and in the downswing, my upper arm moves closer to my body. So that creates a narrowing hand path as we come in towards the downswing position. The other thing that happens is when we swing the club at a decent speed, there are forces that are applied to the club, which creates the club shaft to stand up a little bit. So it returns to the impact position slightly more vertical than where it started. So setting up with this idea of getting the leading edge as low to the ground as possible and introducing shaft lean, what we're basically doing is just trying to simulate what an impact position would really be looking like. Now, from here, like I say, you put your hands on the club, and what it should feel like is it should feel like your hands are really helping you apply a pressure to the side of the club, as though it's going to be much easier to continue to push your hands and push the club through. And again, that's because when we get into our normal setup position, you'd be applying a pressure where you'd be pushing the club more towards you. Okay, so more shaft lean, get the club sitting up a little bit higher, hands supporting towards the side of the club, to the point where it visually looks very different in terms of how the grooves are looking, particularly lower down. Now, you can try and hit a couple of shots from there, that would be absolutely fine, but it doesn't mean just because you start in this position that your flick will go. Okay, so often what happens with a lot of students is they'll start off in this type of position, but when they actually hit the golf ball, they still flick it. But what will happen now is you'll start to expose the face, and for a right-handed golfer, they tend to miss it left. So I would then get golfers set up like this, get them used to it, and then what I'd start to do is similar to what I'm doing now. Grip the club as we just talked about, but now on your trail hand, extend all the fingers out, like so. So the only thing that is now supporting the club is my knuckle on the forefinger side, right? Like so. And then this just helps me now really get a feeling for pushing that club through. And that's ultimately all you're looking for in this sort of session, because you can instantaneously get rid of a scoop. Do you see what I mean? But not by doing the same thing and hitting loads of golf balls. The way you're going to instantaneously get rid of the scoop is, first of all, getting used to setting up in a different impact position, and then position your hands like so. And I bet what you'll find is that you'll completely eliminate that scooping action. And I know this because with students that I've worked with online, and with students that are part of my online academy as well, you know, they are starting to see very quick improvements by doing the drills and the exercises, which is why I'd strongly suggest this for you guys as well. So how does it work? Because obviously the question that I tend to get is, that's all well and good, Russ, but you said, you know, maybe don't do it for these clubs, do it for the... It doesn't ultimately matter. What we're trying to do, and what I try and get all of my students to do, is I try to get them to follow a couple of rules. The first one is achieve as much repetition as you can inside a practice session. And the second thing is to concentrate on one thing in every practice session. But that doesn't mean, if you like this drill, that doesn't mean you have to do it every day for the next 6 months. You might do it once per week. Do you see what I mean? Or depends how often you're practicing. If you're practicing twice per week, you might do it once per week. If you're practicing, more often, less often, you just add variety. And that's the interesting thing when it comes to learning. But what I'm basically saying is what you're not going to do is, it's like when I put my head around here, if you're trying to improve your impact position and you're just hitting 100 range balls doing the same thing, then guess what's going to happen in terms of the results? So you want to get rid of this poor impact. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to start to recreate what impact should really look like. And then what you're going to do is you're going to position your trail hand to the side of the club to ensure that it doesn't allow you to flick and scoop. And then, like I say, you can progress doing this up to something like a 7-iron. By all means, you can do it with your longer clubs. It's the same technique. It's just all I was saying is that with this type of drill, because we're not producing a full swing, we're not going to be producing full club head speed. And because we're not producing full club head speed, you won't produce enough spin to get the ball in the air. So if I was to do this type of drill with, say, like a 4-iron, you can do it, but the ball flight would be very flat. It might be slightly more discouraging than useful. But this is 100% what you want to do. Let me know how you're getting on. I'll see you soon.